The member from Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, to the Premier. The Premier has shown Ontarians time and time again throughout this session that she simply doesn't get what they're going through. Families are at a tipping point when it comes to things like keeping up with their skyrocketing hydro bills. But instead of helping, the Premier has put herself and her party first by ramming through a borrowing scheme that she knows will cause bills to soar even higher than they are now. When will the Premier apologize to Ontarians for putting her political agenda ahead of the very real struggles of the people of Ontario?
Thank you. Premier.
Mr. Speaker, my plan, our plan for the people of Ontario is to invest in this province, to grow the economy, to work with business, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that young people have access to education, excellent education from preschool right through to post-secondary, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that families have access to childcare, to make sure that kids have access to the medication that they need and their families can afford to look after them, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that kids have access to all of the services that they need and families have the support they need, including a reduction in their electricity prices, Mr. Speaker, a reduction that will happen this summer, not in the distant future, if the federal government should deign to agree with them as the NDP plan would have, Mr. Speaker. Our plan is to make sure that people have the resources that they need to take and that they are able to take part in the economic growth of this province, Mr. Speaker.
Answer.
That's what our Fair Workplace plan is about. That's what our Fair Hydro plan is about. That's what our Fair Housing plan is about. And
Thank you. As promised, the member from Prince Edward Hastings is warned. We're now in warnings. Supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. Again to the Premier. The Premier is focused on bringing up her dismal poll numbers. This became obvious when, even after the Financial Accountability Officer confirmed that her hydro borrowing scheme would mean higher, not lower bills for families and businesses, she rammed it through the House anyway. This plan is not good for everyday Ontarians. It is good for those at the top, though. Why is the Premier more concerned about her wealthy Bay Street friends than she is about the people who voted for her?
Minister of Housing is warned. Premier.
well, Mr. Speaker, it's the last day in the legislature before we go on onto the summer portion of our, I'm not going to say break, because I know that everyone in this legislature is going to be working very hard once the House rises. But because it's the last day, Mr. Speaker, I really have to say this. I know that the opposition parties believe that by making a personal attack and raising the issue of my personal polling numbers, that somehow that's going to get under my skin, and that's a good political tactic. Here's the news flash, Mr. Speaker. I know what the polls say. I understand that, and I am absolutely focused on doing what's in the best interest of the people of this province today and every day through this election, Mr. Speaker.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Order. Feel free to continue to insult the chair and be disrespectful. Final supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. Back to the Premier. That was strangely Nixonian, I have to say, Speaker. Speaker, Families and businesses have been telling the Premier for years now that they can't afford more hydro rate hikes. Yet she has pushed ahead with the sell-off of Hydro One and her borrowing scheme, both of which will drive up hydro rates. Why is the Premier ignoring what Ontarians are telling her?
Minister of Energy.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So let's talk about what happened in the House yesterday, Mr. Speaker. We voted in a plan that's actually going to reduce everyone's rates by 25% on average. They voted against that, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry is warned. I may move to name you. This is getting ridiculous. The disrespect you're showing the chair and to each other. Carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to making sure that you have in place a program to help the most vulnerable in this province, when it comes to lowering rates, Mr. Speaker, both opposition parties voted against it, Mr. Speaker. First Nations on reserve individuals who many live in abject poverty, Mr. Speaker. We're reducing their rates.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that they did, Mr. Speaker, they voted against it. We made sure with our plan that we're helping every single family in this province. That's something they continue to vote against.
Thank you.